It's over. Gamers have won. Game Informer has completely gone out of business. After over a decade of being one of the worst gaming publications there is, the magazine has finally shut down. After shilling for Anita Sarkeesian in 2014, after telling a 10-year-old girl that Nintendo didn't produce enough games for them to cover in their magazine. After everything they've done, they are finally gone, and I am celebrating. I don't know why people are like sitting around like trying to say like, oh, they were one of the good ones. No, absolutely not. If anything, I have more resentment and contempt for Game Informer than I do G4 or Kotaku or any of these other websites, because like Game Informer really was like the strong arm of GameStop, you know, tricking you into thinking that PlayStation and Xbox were in any way relevant, that Nintendo wasn't putting out anything good or relevant, and that some of the worst games imaginable were all-time classics and legendary releases, right? Game Informer was just a relic of the 90s in a lot of ways, right? They were actively downplaying everything Nintendo was doing for their entire publication run, right? I remember being surprised when I read that magazine growing up and realizing that just how slanted it was, right? Just how they went to such lengths to avoid talking about like some of the lesser known Nintendo stuff, right? I leaned more towards Nintendo Power because it actually talked about weird, obscure games that I wanted to play. You know, Killer 7, Little King Story, right? You know, Punch Out. Like, Nintendo Power would actually cover the things that I would want to play. But Game Informer was sitting there trying to sell you on just the most insane, boring, like indie woke slop imaginable, right? You know, damage controlling for Anita Sarkeesian. I remember they did when Gamergate was in full swing. It was one of those things that like people didn't talk about because, you know, even back then Game Informer wasn't relevant, but it was a magazine that was actively pushing the agenda, right? It was tied to your GameStop membership program. So if you were subscribed, they sent you a magazine. You know, I remember I didn't renew my membership one year because I specifically did not want the membership. I did not want the magazine. And like the guy at the desk got angry at me for it, but I'm just like, no, absolutely not. I'm done. And then like, you know, I stopped going to GameStop entirely after that. But it's like, this was like embarrassing to see. This was one of those things where a bunch of corrupt people came together and produced this magazine trying to manipulate gamers into thinking that everything was all right in the gaming sphere, that there was nothing wrong with like gaming news coverage, that gaming journals were base and that they covered good games. No. Everyone knows that game journals don't know what they're talking about. But what they don't understand is what that means in practice, right? If game journals don't know anything about video games, then by association, that means they don't know anything about video game consoles. So why exactly would you believe the common game journalism cope that Xbox and PlayStation are the superior gaming platforms when Nintendo is right there, consistently ignored by everyone all the time? Like, back then, people were willing to like go along with the narrative that Nintendo wasn't as good as the other companies, right? People were willing to call them kiddie and willing to dismiss all of these great games, right? People were willing to ignore the rise in popularity of Pokemon and the Kirby games and Fire Emblem in order to push some weird narrative that didn't really make a whole lot of sense, right? Like I remember games like New Super Mario Bros. Getting made fun of even after they started becoming like the best-selling titles ever made, right? I remember Super Mario Galaxy 2 being made fun of, Skyward Sword being made fun of, Sin and Punishment not talked about at all. Like, why exactly would I ever take any game journalism outlet seriously that does not talk about the gaming industry's market leader, right? Why exactly was Game Informer allowed to go through its entire run pushing this idea that like Nintendo was behind the times and couldn't compete and couldn't remain relevant? Like, why exactly would I have ever taken what these beta male soy boy cucks have to say about Nintendo seriously? I was glad when I turned my back on the gaming magazine. I was glad to see that people weren't taking Game Informer seriously. I was glad to see that they had got shut down because this was a magazine that deserved it. This is a magazine that could not do the simplest thing and talk about Nintendo in a gaming magazine. Like, how difficult exactly is that? Like, again, they couldn't do it. They wouldn't do it, And when people would write in to ask about it, the 10-year-old girl that I mentioned earlier, they would make fun of them, right? They shit on a 10-year-old girl for calling them out for not covering Nintendo games. Like, there are no Nintendo games to cover. Fuck you, Game Informer. Fuck you. And everything you try to accomplish, like, fuck your magazine, fuck your legacy, fuck your writers, fuck the people you were protecting. Not just Anita Sarkeesian, but, like, every major gaming executive. Phil Spencer and, like, Jim Ryan and the Valve, Gaben. Like, there was absolutely no defense of your behavior over the past 20 years, right? I have no fond memories of Game Informer whatsoever. This magazine was a complete joke. And seeing it fall by the wayside is just another step forward in eliminating, like, the anti-Nintendo sentiments of yesteryear and our ongoing march to appreciating the history and legacy of the company of tomorrow, right? Like, again, this kind of behavior should not be tolerated and should be condemned at every possible opportunity. Game Informer was complete scum.